We're going to take a look at how you add and subtract with square roots, as well as multiplication with square roots. So to start off with, if I take a look at the top example, I have 3 square roots of 2 plus 5 square roots of 2. When you add square roots, you must have like terms. So this example would be very similar if I were to ask you to take 3x plus 5x. Once it's simplified, you would write that as 8x. You don't change the x, you don't make it an x squared, and you only add the coefficients out front. So this example is similar to that. I'm going to add the coefficients out front, which is the 3 plus 5, but I'm not going to do anything with that square root of 2. It's going to remain a square root of 2. So my first answer would be 8 square roots of 2. In the second example, I only have 2 terms that have the same square roots in them. Those are the only 2 I can combine together. I can't forget there's assumed to be a coefficient of 1 in front of that last square root of 3. When I combine those, 4 plus 1 would give me 5 square roots of 3. My term with the square root of 5 can't be combined with anything else, so I'm just going to bring that down in my answer. Next, we're going to take a look at the basics with multiplying square roots. Unlike addition, you don't need to have like terms. So my top example, I can multiply both of these together. I would start off by multiplying the 2 coefficients in front together, which is 15. Then I would go back and multiply the 2 numbers under the square roots together. 2 times 3 is 6, and that's going to remain under the square root symbol. In the second example, there's a 1 in front of that square root of 5, so I'm going to start off with 1 times 4. Under my square root, I'm going to do 5 times 2, which is 10. So that answer would be 4 square roots of 10. In the third example, -6 would be my coefficient out front. 12 would be my number under the square root. However, we can't forget to make sure our answers are in simplified form. The number 12 has factors of 4 times 3. So I'm actually going to break this down as square root of 4 times the square root of 3, because 4 is a perfect square. The square root of 4 equals the whole number 2. The square root of 3, I can't do anything with that. And then I have this -6, which is being multiplied to this each time. So my final simplified answer would be -12 square roots of 3. We're going to take a look at 3 examples that has a combination of these things. In my top example, none of my square roots are alike. However, square root of 18 can be simplified. I can break this down as square root of 9 times the square root of 2. The square root of 9 equals the whole number 3, so that becomes 3 square roots of 2. I can't forget that the -5 in front is being multiplied to that, so my middle term is actually -15 square roots of 2. And then I'm going to bring down my other 2 terms. So now the last thing to look at is I have 2 terms that have the same square roots in them. So I can simplify these by putting those 2 together. My final answer would be 2 square roots of 3 minus 8 square roots of 2. And the -8 comes from the -15 plus 7. The middle example is the distributive property. So I'm going to multiply this 2 square roots of 3 times each one of those individually. So my first one would be 2 square roots of 18. The 18 comes from the 3 times 6. My next term would be a -6 times the square root of 6. And my final term should be a +8 times the square root of 3. Once again, I have the square root of 18. We already simplified that up here above earlier. So the square root of 18 is nothing more than 3 square roots of 2. but I also have this coefficient of 2 out front, so this term becomes 6 square roots of 2. My square root of 6 doesn't simplify any further, neither does the square root of 3. So now the last thing to look at, I have 3 terms left. None of those terms have the same square roots, so I can't combine anything together. Last example is multiplication, and this is using the FOIL process. So I'm going to start off with multiplying my first terms together. And the 35 comes from multiplying the 7 times the 5. My 2 outside terms be multiplied together. The coefficients in front of each one of those is just the number 1. Then I'm going to go back and do my 2 inside terms. This becomes a positive because a negative 5 times a negative 2 is a positive 10. And then I'm going to multiply my last terms together. The 5 and 3 are not multiplied together because the 5 is a whole number and the 3 is under a square root. The last thing I have to consider is whether I can simplify each of these or not. So if I take a look at 35, factors of 35 would be 7 times 5. Neither of those are perfect squares. I'm going to take a look at square root of 21. Factors of 21 are 7 times 3. Neither of those are perfect squares. Square root of 5, square root of 3, those are already simplified. I can't simplify any of the 4 terms any further. As I look at this, I have 4 different square roots, so I can't even combine any like terms. So my final answer would be what I have written there. Okay, final example. We're going to take a look at simplifying this. It's just basically the distributive property being repeated. So I'm going to start with multiplying those 2 terms together. Then I'm going to take 2 square roots of 3 times that middle term. And then I'm going to take it times the third one. And I only multiply the coefficients out front together, and numbers that are under the square roots get multiplied together. Okay, next I'm going to go back and start with this plus 5 and multiply it to each thing. Okay, my multiplication's done. Next I need to go back and see if I can simplify anything. Once again, here's that square root of 18 again. The square root of 18 can be broken down into those 2 factors. The square root of 9 equals the whole number 3. And then I can't forget about this negative 8 that was being multiplied to the front of it. So my second term simplified should be a negative 24 square roots of 2. Square root of 15 doesn't simplify. Square root of 6 doesn't simplify. My square root of 5 doesn't simplify. So I'm just going to bring the last of these terms down because they don't simplify. Next, I need to see if I have any like terms, and I do have some like terms. I have 2 terms that have this square root of 2 in them, and I have 2 terms that have this square root of 6 in them. So I'm going to start with my square roots of 2. If I take a negative 24 plus a 35, that's 11 square roots of 2. Then I'm going to go to my square roots of 6's. I have a plus 14 and a minus 20, so that's a minus 6 square roots of 6. And then finally, I'm just going to bring down my last 2 terms that don't get combined with anything. So this is what our final simplified answer would look like.